And I wonder, like, what do you think is like the biggest change that happened over like the last, let's say, like 5-6 years in this landscape, right? Like, there were the cloud wars, or like the orchestrator wars, right? Between like Docker, Mesos, and Kubernetes. It feels like, like Kubernetes is kind of like the last man standing, but I wonder, you've been there also like pretty much that time. Like, how did it feel like back then? And maybe also like your take on like why did Kubernetes won overall in the end?
Yeah, I think if you rewind to, like you say, 6, maybe 7, 8 years ago, it was very unclear what was going to happen, right? We had Mesosphere, we had Kubernetes, we had Docker Swarm. Docker had kind of 2 different versions of Swarm, which got a little bit confusing for people over time.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, there's like the one that's built into the engine as a client, and then there's like the kind of enterprise operations edition. So people started to be like, what Swarm are we talking about here? At the time, it was very unclear what was going to happen. People were choosing all 3, and I think, this is really symbolic of something we see a lot in technology, which is that when there's lots of innovation happening in a space, there's lots of fragmentation that happens in that same space, right? Tons of different options out there. People are choosing all of them because they all seem the same, or they can't tell the differences apart. There is no effective differentiation. Or some of them just aren't general purpose enough to appeal to enough different use cases out there so that people can see a clear right answer. And then at the end of that phase of innovation becomes consolidation, right? Things start to merge back together. Yep. It becomes clear what the obvious solution is. Like the obvious solution, maybe 10 years ago, there would be a clear answer to what CPU should you get? What brand, what company makes it? But if you ask that same question today, and you said, what CPU should I get? What architecture should it be? That answer is not as clear today as it was, right? And it might even be driven by what brand of laptop manufacturer you prefer, rather than making a CPU choice specifically, right? So we see this fragmentation and consolidation happening over and over. Living through that, it was just a real messy time, right? And every time that's happening, every vendor under the sun tries to jump in and sell their own wares, somehow make their pitch appeal to whatever is happening at the time. And so what was going on at that time, right? You had container orchestration rising, but you also had DevOps as kind of the dominant term for the entire decade of the 2010s, I would say, right? Which means everybody was DevOps washing. We still have these DevOps Days conferences around. I'm a co-organizer for the Minneapolis one where I live.
Yeah.
And it's great to see them, but they're evolving, right? The roles continue to shift, the technologies continue to shift. If they want to stay in existence as a community and an event, they have to evolve with the times, right? You can't say, oh, I like DevOps the way it was in 2015. We really had it right then. Like, you're kind of like the server huggers from, back in the data center days, where they're like, oh man, we gotta name all our servers, and we gotta give them names like Star Trek characters or whatever it might be. We've mostly moved past that, thankfully, but there's still a lot of that resistance to adopting new technologies. And so